Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and every single piece of information you have ever received, every news broadcast, every history lesson, every story your parents told you, was chosen for you, carefully selected, filtered, designed to make you believe something that may not be true. Now imagine that this has been happening to an entire nation of over 25 million people for more than 70 years. No internet, no foreign newspapers, no outside phone calls. Just one story. The story the government wants you to hear. Most people think they know North Korea. They think it's just a strange, isolated country with a quirky dictator and a nuclear obsession. They see the parade footage. They hear about the missiles. They laugh at the propaganda posters. But what if everything you think you know about North Korea is exactly what they want you to think? Because behind the rockets and the marching soldiers and the carefully rehearsed performances for foreign cameras, there is another world. A world so hidden, so deeply buried, that even the people living inside don't fully understand it. Today, we are pulling back that curtain. North Korea, officially known as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, a country that covers just a small stretch of land on the Korean Peninsula, yet manages to haunt the nightmares of world leaders, military strategists, and human rights organizations alike. For decades, this nation has been called the most secretive country on Earth, and that title is earned because North Korea doesn't just keep secrets from the outside world. It keeps secrets from its own people. It has built an entire civilization on the foundation of a carefully constructed illusion. But here's the thing that nobody talks about. The real story of North Korea is not about nuclear weapons. It is not about military parades or missile tests or diplomatic standoffs. Those are the things that dominate the headlines. Those are the stories that governments and media outlets want you to focus on. The hidden truth of North Korea goes much deeper than that. It is a story about human beings, about a system so perfectly designed to control the human mind that even the world's most brilliant psychologists look at it in a kind of horrified awe. It is a story about a social experiment unlike anything in human history. An experiment being conducted on 25 million unwilling participants right now, at this very moment, as you watch this. And perhaps most shocking of all, it is a story about the parts that the outside world has quietly decided to ignore. Because the truth about North Korea is not just uncomfortable for the Kim regime, it is uncomfortable for all of us. What you are about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about this country, about freedom, and about what human beings are capable of doing to one another, and to themselves in the name of power. This is the hidden truth about North Korea that nobody talks about. The architecture of control. To understand North Korea, you have to go back to the very beginning. Not just to the founding of the state in 1948. You have to go back to the idea, the blueprint, because North Korea was not an accident of history. It was a design. When the Korean Peninsula was divided after World War II, the Soviet Union installed a young, unknown military officer named Kim Il-sung to lead the northern half. He was 33 years old. He had spent most of his life in exile, fighting as a guerrilla against the Japanese occupation of Korea. He was relatively obscure. He was malleable. The Soviets thought they could control him. They were wrong. What Kim Il-sung understood, in a way that almost no other leader in modern history has understood, was that physical control of the population is temporary. Armies can be defeated. Walls can be climbed. But if you can control what a person believes, what a person feels, what a person fears, then you have them forever. So from the very first days of his rule, Kim Il-sung did not just build a government. He built a religion. He took the ancient Korean concept of the family unit, the deeply rooted Confucian idea that a father's authority over his children is absolute and sacred, and he scaled it up to the size of an entire country. He made himself the father, the eternal parent, the protector and provider of a family of 25 million people. But here's what makes this so extraordinary. He did not just put up portraits and demand loyalty. He built an entire mythology around himself. He rewrote history so completely that North Koreans genuinely believed, and many still believe today, that Kim Il-sung was a supernatural being, a man who could control the weather with his emotions, a man who appeared from nowhere to single-handedly defeat the Japanese and liberate the Korean people. In North Korean textbooks, the story of Kim Il-sung is not political history. It is scripture. And once you build a religion, once you make the leader into a god, you do not need soldiers at every doorstep. You do not need guards watching every window. Because the most powerful prison in the world is the one built inside a person's mind. But the system Kim Il-sung created went even further than that. And that is where the story gets truly chilling. The hidden hierarchy nobody talks about. Most people who discuss North Korea talk about the Kim family. They talk about the nuclear weapons. They talk about the famines and the labor camps. But there is one aspect of life in North Korea that rarely makes it into mainstream coverage. One system so vast and so insidious that it touches every single person in the country from the moment they are born. It is called Songbun, and it might be the most sophisticated system of social control ever invented. Songbun is a classification system. Every single North Korean citizen is assigned a political and social status at birth based on the background of their family, going back 3 generations. Not their own behavior, not their own choices, their family's history from 70, 80 years ago. If your grandfather was a loyal supporter of Kim Il-sung during the Korean War, your family receives a high Songbun classification. You are trusted. You have access to good schools, good food, good housing. You can live in Pyongyang, the showcase capital city. You might even get to join the Workers' Party of Korea, the ultimate symbol of status and privilege. But if your grandfather was a landlord before the communist revolution, if he owned property, if he was considered part of the old capitalist class, then your family receives a low Songbun classification. You're a suspect. You are unreliable. And that mark follows you, your children, and your grandchildren for the rest of your lives. There are roughly 50 different subcategories within the Songbun system. At the very top are the core class, the trusted loyalists. In the middle is the wavering class, ordinary people who are tolerated but watched. And at the very bottom is the hostile class, the descendants of those deemed enemies of the state. People who have done nothing wrong themselves, but who carry the invisible weight of their ancestors' perceived sins. Now think about what this means in practice. A child born into a hostile class family will never be allowed to study at a good university. They will never be allowed to join the military's prestigious units. They will never live in Pyongyang. They will be assigned to the hardest, most dangerous labor, the mines, the logging camps in the freezing north, the collective farms where food is always scarce, and they will never be told exactly why. The system is not written in a public law book. It is not announced on television. It simply exists, invisible and absolute, shaping every opportunity and every door that opens or closes in a person's life. But the truly terrifying part of the Songbun system is not just what it does to the people of the bottom. It is what it does to the people of the top. Because the citizens with high Songbun, the privileged class, they become the system's greatest offenders. not because they are forced to, but because they have everything to lose. Their status, their comfort, their children's futures are all contingent on maintaining the regime's power. So they watch, they report, they enforce. The regime has essentially turned its most privileged citizens into its own police force. It is a stroke of genius, in the most horrifying sense of that word. And even this, as devastating as it is, was only part of the system Kim Il-sung built. Because beneath the Songbun hierarchy, beneath the mythology and the loyalty rituals, there was something else. Something that the regime has worked harder than anything else to keep hidden from the outside world. What happened next changed everything. Inside the Gulag, the world forgot. In 1972, American journalist Jasper Becker was one of the first Western journalists to visit North Korea. He toured model farms. He visited spotless hospitals. He watched children perform elaborate dances in perfectly pressed uniforms. He was shown a country of order, prosperity, and happiness. What he was not shown, what no foreign visitor has ever been officially shown, were the mountains. Because in the mountains of North Korea, far from the showcase cities and the diplomatic tours, there exists a network of political prison camps so vast that they are visible from space. Satellite imagery has confirmed their existence for decades. Former guards and prisoners have risked their lives to describe what happens inside them. And yet, somehow, the world continues to move on. These camps are called Kwanliso, and they're not prisons in any conventional sense of the word. A conventional prison has sentences. It has rules. It has, at least theoretically, the possibility of release. The Kwanliso have none of these things. The largest of these camps, Camp 14, Camp 15, Camp 16, Camp 22, are cities unto themselves. Camp 15, also known as Yodok, is estimated to cover an area larger than the city of Los Angeles. It has mines, farms, factories, and thousands upon thousands of prisoners who were sent there not because of anything they did, but because of something a family member did. Sometimes a family member they have never even met. This is the principle of collective punishment. The regime calls it guilt by association. If a person is found guilty of political disloyalty, of listening to a foreign radio broadcast, of telling a joke about the Kim family, of practicing Christianity, it is not only that person who is imprisoned. Their entire family goes with them. Grandparents, parents, children, babies. There are children who are born inside these camps and who have never seen the outside world. They do not know what a city looks like. They do not know what money is. They do not know that there is a world beyond the electrified fence and the frozen mountains. One of the most remarkable and devastating testimonies in human rights history comes from a man named Shin Dong-hyuk, who was born in Camp 14 in 1983. His parents were prisoners. He grew up knowing nothing else. He was taught from infancy that the guards were to be obeyed absolutely. That informing on fellow prisoners, even on your own parents, was the highest act of loyalty. That food was something you fought for, something you earned through suffering. At the age of 13, Shin overheard his mother and brother discussing an escape plan. He reported them to the guards immediately, not because he was afraid, but because that was what he had been taught was right. His mother and brother were executed, and Shin was tortured for weeks regardless, on the suspicion that he had known about the plan all along. He would not escape from the camp himself until he was 23 years old. When Shin Dong-hyuk finally made it to South Korea and then to the United States, he sat in front of audiences of educated, comfortable people and told them this story. And the reaction he most commonly received was not outrage. It was disbelief, because people could not comprehend that a human being could be raised in a system so total, so complete in its control of every thought and every instinct, that he could feel no grief at his mother's death, not because he was a monster, but because he had never been taught how. Experts estimate that between 80,000 and 120,000 people are currently imprisoned in North Korea's political prison camps. Some estimates go higher, but the truth is even more shocking than the camps themselves, because the camps, as horrifying as they are not the regime's most powerful tool. The hidden battle for 25 million minds. Here's a question that most documentaries never ask. If the world has known about North Korea's prison camps for decades, if we have the satellite photographs, the defector testimonies, the reports from human rights organizations, then why does the regime still stand? Why, after more than 70 years, is the Kim family still in power? The answer is not military. It is not economic. It is not political. The answer is information, or rather, the complete and total absence of it. North Korea operates what experts describe as the most airtight information control system in human history. And understanding how it works, truly understanding it, tells us something profound not just about North Korea, but about the nature of human belief itself. Every North Korean household is required by law to have a government-issued radio. It cannot be turned off. It cannot be tuned to another frequency. It broadcasts government content 24 hours a day. The same messages, the same songs, the same stories of the Kim family's greatness and America's evil, over and over and over again. Television broadcasts are entirely state-controlled. There are no foreign channels. There is no internet, not the global internet that the rest of the world uses. North Korea has its own internal intranet system called Pyongyang, which contains only government-approved content, academic papers, government news, propaganda films, nothing else. Owning a radio that can receive foreign signals is a crime punishable by imprisonment. Watching a foreign film, a South Korean drama, a Hollywood movie, can result in public execution. And these are not empty threats. North Korean defectors have described watching their neighbors being dragged to public squares and shot for exactly these offenses. And yet, something extraordinary has been happening in North Korea over the past 2 decades. Something the regime never anticipated. Something that has crept in through the cracks of the most controlled society on Earth. USB drives. Small, easily hidden, impossible to detect from the outside. For years, activists and human rights organizations in South Korea and China have been loading USB drives with South Korean dramas, Hollywood films, K-pop music, and outside news, and smuggling them across the border. Traders carry them hidden in shoes, sewn into clothing, buried in food shipments. And North Koreans, at extraordinary personal risk, have been watching them. What happens when a North Korean watches a South Korean drama for the first time is something that defectors describe in almost identical terms. It is not a political awakening. It does not begin with questions about the regime or the Kim family. It begins with something far more mundane. It begins with the realization that South Koreans are not starving. The North Korean government has told its people for generations that South Korea is an American colony, a puppet state where the people live in desperate poverty under the heel of U.S. military occupation. The propaganda is detailed and consistent. South Koreans, North Koreans are told, envy the prosperity and freedom of the North. And then a North Korean watches a South Korean drama. and they see an ordinary South Korean family sitting around a table covered with food, a refrigerator full of groceries, a family that argues and laughs and makes choices about where to go for dinner. And everything begins to fall apart. Former North Korean defector Hyun-seo Lee, whose memoir and TED Talk have reached millions of people around the world, describes the moment she first watched a foreign video as the moment her entire understanding of reality began to crack. Not because of anything dramatic, because of a refrigerator, because of the ordinary, unremarkable abundance of an ordinary South Korean family's kitchen. If this is how their poor people live, she remembered thinking, what does that mean about everything I've been taught? That question, once it enters a person's mind, cannot be unasked, and the regime knows this, which is why the punishment for watching foreign media has become increasingly severe in recent years. Kim Jong-un, who took power in 2011 after his father Kim Jong-il's death, passed what became known as the Reactionary Thought and Culture Rejection Act in 2020. Under this law, watching foreign content can now result in the death penalty. Sharing it can result in life imprisonment. But the USB drives keep coming, and something else has been happening as well. Something that may ultimately prove to be the most significant development in North Korea's modern history. Something that the regime has been desperately trying to suppress. The hidden truth everyone ignores. In the 1990s, something happened in North Korea that the regime calls the Arduous March. The outside world calls it the Great North Korean Famine. Between 1994 and 1998, North Korea experienced a catastrophic collapse of its state food distribution system. The Soviet Union, which had been subsidizing North Korea's economy for decades, had dissolved. Floods and droughts devastated crops, and the government, rather than asking for help or acknowledging the scale of the disaster, maintained a fiction that everything was fine. While the leadership in Pyongyang ate well, somewhere between 500,000 and 3.5 million North Korean people starved to death. Think about that number. In a country of 23 million people at the time, conservative estimates suggest that 2 to 3% of the entire population died of hunger. Some estimates go far higher. And here is what is extraordinary, what is almost incomprehensible. The famine did not just kill people, it changed them. Because for the first time in the history of the regime, the state food distribution system, the mechanism through which the government controlled every citizen's access to the most basic necessity of human life, broke down completely. People were left with a choice: wait for a government that was not coming, or find food themselves. And in finding food for themselves, North Koreans did something they had never been permitted to do before. They traded. Black markets began to spring up across the country. People sold whatever they had, clothes, tools, furniture, to buy food from neighbors who had found ways to grow or smuggle it. Women, in particular, became the backbone of this underground economy, while men were required to report to their state work units every day. Regardless of whether those work units were actually functioning, women had slightly more freedom of movement. They became traders, entrepreneurs, risk takers. The Jangmadang, the informal market, was born out of starvation. And once it was born, it could not be unborn. Today, despite the regime's attempt to crack down on private enterprise, informal markets exist in virtually every city and town in North Korea. Millions of people participate in them. They're the reason most North Koreans eat. They are also the reason, the primary reason, that USB drives and foreign media can be bought and sold, that information moves, that the crack in the regime's information control continues to widen year by year. And the people who have grown up in this market economy, the generation of North Koreans who were children during the famine and young adults today, they're different from their parents. They have learned to think for themselves in ways that the previous generation never had to. They have learned to navigate a world where you cannot rely on the state, where you have to solve problems, where you have to judge people's trustworthiness for yourself. They have learned, in other words, to think. And a population that thinks is the one thing that the Kim regime cannot afford. But here's the part of this story that is most uncomfortable. The part that almost nobody discusses. The part that implicates not just the North Korean government, but the governments of every major power on Earth. The world knows about all of this. The United Nations has conducted detailed investigations. Human rights organizations have published thousands of pages of testimony. The United States, the European Union, South Korea, Japan, they all have access to satellite imagery, defector reports, intelligence assessments. They know about the camps. They know about the famine. They know about information control. They know about the executions. And for decades, the response has been the same. Sanctions, statements, concern. Because the truth is that North Korea is not a problem that any major power has found it convenient to solve. China does not want a regime collapse on its border that would send millions of refugees streaming across. South Korea does not want the economic catastrophe of reunification, estimated to cost trillions of dollars. The United States is focused on the nuclear weapons, not the human rights. Russia has its own interests in maintaining regional instability. 25 million people live in one of the most brutal systems of control ever devised by human beings. And the world has, through inaction, through geopolitical calculation, through a collective turning away, decided that this is acceptable. That is the hidden truth about North Korea that nobody talks about. Not just what the regime does, but what the rest of us allow. After the curtain falls. So where does this leave us? North Korea today stands at what many analysts describe as a genuine inflection point. The information that is flowing in slowly, painfully, at enormous personal risk to the people carrying it, is doing something that 70 years of sanctions and diplomatic pressure have failed to do. It is changing what North Koreans believe. Defectors who have left in the past decade describe a population that is increasingly skeptical of the official narrative. Not openly, never openly, because the consequences of open dissent remain catastrophic. But privately, in whispered conversations between people who trust each other absolutely, questions are being asked that would have been literally unthinkable a generation ago. Is Kim Jong-un really a god? Is South Korea really a hell of poverty and oppression? Is America really the source of all suffering in the world? Are we really the happiest people on earth? These questions are seeds, and seeds, once planted, have a way of growing. But we should not romanticize this. The road from a cracking information monopoly to any kind of meaningful change in North Korea is long, dangerous, and deeply uncertain. The regime has shown extraordinary resilience and extraordinary brutality in the face of every previous challenge to its authority. Kim Jong-un has continued to develop nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles not because he's irrational or reckless, but because he understands, correctly, that nuclear weapons are the ultimate insurance policy against the kind of regime change that happened in Libya, in Iraq, in countries whose leaders gave up their weapons programs and then faced Western military intervention. He is not crazy. He is calculating. And yet, history has a tendency to surprise us. The Soviet Union seemed permanent until it wasn't. The Berlin Wall seemed immovable until it fell in a single night. The apartheid system in South Africa seemed unassailable until Nelson Mandela walked out of prison and into a negotiated transition. None of these changes happened because outside powers decided to make them happen. They happened because the weight of truth, the simple, stubborn, unkillable human knowledge of what is real versus what is told, eventually became too heavy to carry. There are 25 million people in North Korea tonight. Most of them will go to sleep in a world they have been carefully taught to believe is the only world that exists. But some of them, and that number is growing, will lie awake with a question they cannot silence. The question is not about politics. It is not about ideology. It is the simplest question a human being can ask. Is this the truth? And when enough people ask that question, and when they begin to share it quietly, secretly, at enormous risk, the most carefully constructed prison in human history will face something it has never faced before. Not an army, not sanctions, not diplomacy, just people who know, and knowing, as the regime of Kim Il-sung understood from the very beginning, is everything. The hidden truth about North Korea is not in Pyongyang's palaces, or in its missile silos, or in its military parades. It is in the 25 million human stories that the world has chosen, for 70 years, not to look at directly. It is in the child born in a prison camp who does not know that the world outside the fence exists. It is in the woman who watched a South Korean drama on a smuggled USB drive and felt her entire reality begin to tremble. It is in the family separated by a border drawn by foreign powers in 1945 who have never been allowed to speak to each other again. It is in the collective silence of a world that knows and continues, day after day, to look away. The hidden truth about North Korea is not really about North Korea at all. It is about what we, all of us, are willing to accept as the price of our own comfort. And that truth, that is the one worth losing sleep over. We often think of freedom as something we either have or we don't. A switch that is either on or off. But North Korea shows us something far more unsettling. It shows us that freedom is something that can be so completely removed, so methodically, so patiently, so skillfully extracted from a human life, that the person it was taken from doesn't even know it's gone. 25 million people are living proof of what is possible when those in power decide that controlling the story matters more than the lives of the people in it. But they are also proof of something else. That even in the most total darkness, information finds a way to move. That the human instinct to know, to question, to reach towards something true, cannot be permanently extinguished. North Korea's story is not over. It is still being written, right now, by people whose names we will probably never know, taking risks we can barely imagine, for a future that none of us can predict. The least we can do is pay attention. The least we can do is know. Because once you know the truth, really know it, you can never fully look away again. If this documentary opened your eyes to a truth you hadn't seen before, then it has done exactly what it was made to do. At Hidden Truth Files, we believe that the stories the world ignores are often the ones that matter most. If you want to keep uncovering the hidden truths behind the world's most powerful and most ignored stories, subscribe to Hidden Truth Files. Every documentary we make is a door into a world most people never see. And once you start opening those doors, you will never want to stop. The truth is always there. You just have to be willing to look. Hidden Truth Files, uncovering what the world forgot to tell you.